It seems like you're looking for a dramatic, true story-style narrative about infidelity involving a handyman. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to find herself in this situation. Married for 10 years, comfortable in my routine, I thought my life was predictable, maybe a little too predictable. My husband, Daniel, worked long hours, and our conversations had dwindled to the basics: groceries, bills, and the occasional, "How was your day?" But nothing could have prepared me for what happened the day the handyman arrived. The beginning of something dangerous. It all started when I noticed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. It had been dripping for weeks, a slow, rhythmic reminder of all the little things in my house, and my marriage, that had fallen into neglect. Daniel kept promising to fix it, but work always got in the way. Frustrated, I called a handyman service, expecting an older, experienced worker to show up. Instead, he arrived. Jake was young, 25 at most, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone older. Tall, with messy dark hair and a 5 o'clock shadow, he had the kind of rugged charm that made you look twice. When he smiled, dimples flashed on his cheeks, and his green eyes seemed to hold secrets. "Kitchen sink, right?" he asked, slinging his toolbox onto the counter. I nodded, suddenly aware of the fact that I was wearing my old, faded house clothes. "Yeah, it's been leaking for a while." "No problem, I got this." His voice was deep, steady. As he got to work, I retreated to the living room, curling up on the sofa with my laptop. I told myself I wasn't paying attention to him, but every time he moved, my eyes flickered toward the kitchen. The way his muscles flexed under his t-shirt as he reached for his tools, the little frown of concentration on his face, it was distracting in a way I hadn't expected. Crossing the line, after about 30 minutes, he stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. "All done," he said. "Want me to check anything else while I'm here?" I hesitated. "Actually, the light in the hallway has been flickering." "Show me," he said, his gaze lingering on me just a second too long. I led him down the hallway, hyper-aware of how close he was behind me. When I pointed at the faulty light, he leaned in, his arm nearly brushing mine. "Loose wiring, probably," he murmured. His voice had changed, lower, softer. I swallowed hard. "It's been acting up for weeks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You should have called sooner," he replied, turning to face me. There was something unreadable in his eyes, something that made my breath catch. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, as if testing the limits of the unspoken tension, he reached out, slowly, deliberately. His fingers brushed the side of my arm, tracing a light, barely their touch that sent shivers down my spine. I should have stepped back. I should have said something. But I didn't. Here's part 2 of the infidelity story, continuing where we left off. My breath caught in my throat. Jake's fingers barely grazed my skin, but the touch sent a current through me, one I hadn't felt in a long time. My heart pounded as I stood in that dimly lit hallway, trapped between what I knew was right and the undeniable pull of something forbidden. I should have moved. I should have laughed it off, created distance, anything to break the spell. But I didn't. Instead, I looked up at him. His green eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of hesitation in them, as if waiting for a sign. A warning. But when I didn't step away, he took a slow step closer. "You seem lonely," he murmured. His voice was smooth, but there was a weight behind it, as if he knew the truth before I could even admit it to myself. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell him I was fine, that this wasn't what it looked like, but the words didn't come. Because the truth was, I was lonely. For years, Daniel and I had been stuck in a cycle of routine, of brief kisses and hollow words, of distant nights where I lay awake while he snored beside me. My marriage wasn't broken, but it wasn't whole either. And now, here was this man, this stranger, seeing right through me. A line crossed. I swallowed hard, stepping back against the hallway wall. Jake followed, his movements slow, calculated, as if giving me every opportunity to stop him. His hand lifted, hesitant, until his knuckles brushed against my cheek. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. A shiver ran through me. My body was betraying me, leaning toward him even as my mind screamed at me to stop. I clenched my fists, trying to summon the willpower to step away. But then, he leaned in. Soft, so soft, His lips hovered just a breath away from mine. I felt my resolve crumbling. And then, the sound of my phone buzzing on the table in the living room shattered the moment. I jolted, stepping back as if waking from a trance. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my face flushed with guilt, with fear, with something I couldn't name. Jake blinked, his expression unreadable, but he didn't push further. "That's your cue," he said, his voice quieter now. I hesitated for only a second before brushing past him, practically running into the living room. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. Daniel. My husband's name flashed on the screen, and suddenly, a wave of shame crashed over me. What was I doing? What had I almost done? I took a deep breath before answering. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Hey, babe," Daniel said. "Just wanted to check in. I might be home late tonight, things are crazy at work. You doing okay?" My throat tightened. I glanced toward the hallway, where Jake stood watching me, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just getting some things fixed around the house." "Good," Daniel said. "I'll see you later, okay? Love you. Love you too." The words felt strange leaving my mouth, like a habit rather than something I truly felt in the moment. As soon as I hung up, I turned back toward Jake, who had stepped into the living room. "You should go," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but there was something else in his eyes, something knowing. "If that's what you want," he said. Was it? I wasn't sure, but I nodded anyway. Jake picked up his toolbox and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly. "I'll send you the invoice later," he said, but the look he gave me told me we both knew this wasn't over. And as I closed the door behind him, pressing my forehead against the wood, I wasn't sure whether I felt relief or regret. To be continued.